In a smartphone market where most of the phones follow a similar formula, one way to stand out from the crowd is the size. Such is the case with Asus's new compact flagship, the Zenfone 9. Last year's model also had a pint-sized form factor, so what's new this time around? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our full review. Asus has continued to streamline its Zenfone lineup. There's no Zenfone Flip this year, just one device, the Zenfone 9. It feels nice not to have to keep track of a dozen different variants like you do with some other manufacturers. Compact phones are kind of rare these days. The trend is toward larger devices with bigger screens, but there's still a market for something that's both easily pocketable and has the cutting-edge specs to boot. The Zenfone 9 is about the same size as last year's model, and even though there's a larger battery capacity and main camera this time around, it has the same weight at 169 grams. The aluminum frame is now flat to allow more internal room for components, and the Zenfone 9 has a flat, soft back panel rather than curved glass. The polymer material is a sort of plastic that feels rubbery, like one of those big pink erasers from grade school. It's an interesting touch, but less elegant, especially with the shapes and text printed on it. Asus claims this material should be as shatter-resistant as plastic, but much more scratch-resistant. Plus, there's IP68 rated dust and water resistance here, and Gorilla Glass Victus protecting the front. The screen is a 5.9-inch AMOLED with a 1080p resolution and a 120Hz refresh rate. Because of its smaller size, it's quite sharp at 445 ppi. Content looks good here, if you don't mind a smaller picture. There's excellent contrast and support for HDR10+. The colors aren't the most accurate by default, though you can customize them further through settings. There's plenty of brightness here. We measured a maximum of 450 nits with the manual slider, and this can boost up to 830 nits with the auto brightness mode on. There's a 240Hz touch sampling rate on this display for extra responsiveness, and the 120Hz refresh rate is great for smoothing out movement in the interface. It can dial down to save energy, but it won't go down below 60 Hz. Unlike the Zenfone 8, there's no under-display fingerprint reader. It's side-mounted now and works well, but the placement feels a little awkward because the device is so small. It does add some extra functionality though. You can use it as a smart key, and it can access shortcuts not only through a double or long press, but by swiping it too. For audio, the Zenfone 9 has a traditional headphone jack. It's nice that they kept it around, even though space is at a premium here. There's also a pair of stereo speakers, with the earpiece acting as the second speaker. The setup is tuned by Dirac and earned a rating of good on our loudness charts. The sound quality is great, with clear vocals, nice treble, and noticeable lows.
I'm wide awake, but you're a nightmare.
The Zenfone 9 comes with 128 or 256 gigs of storage on board. That isn't expandable through microSD though. The interface of the phone is Asus's Zen UI 9 on top of Android 12. It's not too heavy of a skin, there's no bloatware or anything, and just a few proprietary apps. Still, there is some custom functionality available. I've already mentioned the Smart Key shortcuts, but on top of that, you can also assign shortcuts to a double tap on the back of the phone. Need even more shortcuts? Don't worry, there's more space for them through the Edge tool panel, which opens apps in a pop-up window. Even though the Zenfone 9 is quite small, you can easily enter a more compact one-handed mode with a downward swipe near the bottom of the screen. And finally, there's a Game Genie, which provides access to game-related features. It's almost as in-depth as on Asus's ROG phones, and there are plenty of options here. It's also worth mentioning that Asus is promising updates to 2 major Android versions and at least 2 years of security updates. One of the major upgrades the Zenfone 9 brings over last year's model is the chipset. The Zenfone 8 had a Snapdragon 888, but here you get the latest and greatest Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. This means you get a bump in performance compared to the previous model, and even flagships from earlier in 2022. Benchmark scores are among the highest we've seen for an Android phone. The thermals, though, are a mixed bag. Asus has done quite a bit to keep the heat under control, with an advanced passive cooling system that's much larger than what the Zenfone 8 had. The Zenfone 9 actually did a respectable job in our CPU sustained performance test, but when it came to the graphics test, we did see significant thermal throttling over time. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, the Zenfone 9 also has a larger battery capacity than last year at 4300 mAh. As expected, battery life has improved, and the Zenfone 9 scored an endurance rating of 108 hours in our proprietary test, an excellent result for a high-end phone of this size. The Zenfone 9 comes bundled with the same 30-watt charger like last year, and the charging speed is decent. We were able to charge from 0 to 57% in half an hour. There is no wireless charging though. Now onto the Zenfone 9's dual cameras. There's a new 50-megapixel main cam with a Sony IMX766 sensor, advanced phase detection autofocus, and 6-axis gimbal stabilization. Then there's the 12-megapixel ultra-wide cam with autofocus, which is the same as last year. The gimbal corrects camera shake similar to OIS, but here the whole camera module moves and not just the lens, and you get 3 degrees of correction angle as opposed to just 1 on your average OIS system. During the day, photos from the main camera look great. Colors have plenty of pop without going overboard. Contrast is high and the dynamic range is very good. The level of detail is good, but we're not huge fans of the rendition. Fine details and textures look overprocessed when pixel peeping. Portrait shots come out with a slight cropped zoom, which makes for a nicer shooting distance and perspective, but you lose a bit on sharpness. Still, these look good, with proficient subject separation. Speaking of cropped zoom, since there's no telephoto cam, you'll be zooming digitally with the main one. At 2 times, these don't have quite the detail and sharpness of a dedicated zoom, but they're still decent. The ultra-wide camera is more natural than the main cam in the way it renders detail, and it's actually one of the better ultra-wides around. There are likable colors, and the dynamic range is solid. Plus, since the camera has autofocus, you can use it to shoot nearby subjects too. In low light, the Zenfone 9 will automatically apply night mode processing. It doesn't always kick in, but then you can force it on through a toggle in settings. It provides a likable exposure with balanced highlights and shadows, both with preserved detail. There is some added sharpening which can look artificial at times, but overall we like this nighttime rendition. One thing that's slightly annoying is that each night mode shot takes around 3 seconds to process. We've seen much speedier night modes on other phones. If you toggle off the night mode, you avoid this issue, but the images tend to be underexposed with very limited dynamic range. It's a similar story with the ultra-wide. When it kicks in, the auto night mode provides a nice exposure, and there's plenty of color and detail from both the shadows and highlights. The images are over-sharpened, and there's low noise. Notably, these take even longer to process than the main cam shots. With the night mode off, the ultra-wide can suffer from similar exposure issues as the main one. Selfies from the 12-megapixel front-facing cam are pretty great. There's excellent detail, nicely saturated colors, and wide dynamic range. Backlit scenes are no problem either. Plus, since this camera has autofocus, the subject always comes out sharp. The Zenfone 9 can record video with this main cam and all the way up to 8K resolution at 24 FPS. The quality of the 8K is nothing special though. Detail is about average for this sort of footage. In contrast, 4K clips from the main cam are quite nice. They have a good amount of detail, high contrast, low noise, and vivid colors. Coupled with EIS algorithms, the gimbal stabilization is spectacular here, smoothing out your walking and pans. It all looks rock solid. The ultra-wide camera is one of the better ones we've seen when it comes to 4K video. It's sharp and detailed with plenty of contrast and lively colors. Plus, even though it's missing the gimbal, the ultra-wide performs quite well when it comes to stabilization. In low-light situations, the main camera holds up decently well. It's not winning contests for dynamic range or sharpness, but areas with more balanced lighting have good detail, and colors are generally well preserved. The ultra-wide camera's clips are softer and noisier, but still very much usable in a pinch. So that's the Asus Zenfone 9. Just like last year, it's pretty incredible how they fit all of those proper flagship features within this tiny body. And this time around, you get a better main cam with excellent stabilization, improved battery life, and the latest chipset. The main nitpicks we have are that there's no telephoto cam and no wireless charging either, and there are mixed opinions about the new design. These aren't exactly deal breakers though, and if you're after a cutting-edge, pocket-friendly flagship, the Zenfone 9 is definitely worth recommending. Thanks for watching guys, stay safe and see you on the next one.